Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to series in against Sicilian e4, c5, knight f3, d6, and when white plays against us some sidelines. I'm actually preparing you for the Dragon course that is going to be on Chessable and chess.com this year. So get ready for the best course and best opening you'll ever play with the black pieces. So let's go. Have you ever heard of Ljubomir Ljubojevic? It's a legendary Serbian GM, one of the best Serbian players ever. And in the mid of 80s and beginning of 90s, he was sometimes second, sometimes third player of the world after Anatoly Karpov and Garry Kasparov. Why did I bring his name up here? Because Ljubomir Ljubojevic, in one of his games, I believe against Ivanchuk or Kasparov, I'm not sure who was black, prepared. He was always famous for these original opening choices. And here he opened up with e5. So he is the first one who on a really high level used this e5 move. So let's go and let's immediately see what's happening there and how should you play. After e4, c5, knight f3, d6, lots of guys first play knight c3, and just when you play knight f6, hoping for neither dragon, Scheveningen rouser, they just play e5. And I just have to tell you something, this is extremely annoying opening. I remember playing this numerous of times with the black pieces, and I always feel kind of annoyed because it's hyper solid for white. They don't take any special, like risks. And it's very difficult for us to come up with something sharp. So in this lesson, I'm just going to show you how should you trade these systems, what are you supposed to do, and how to face this fairly solid and hard to break opening. So let's go. After e5, we gotta take on e5, and they just take. When they take, bringing the knight into the center, like reminds me of that opening, special opening against Karakin when the early knight stands on e5, and they always, like flirt with these ideas, bishop e5 for white. So when they play knight e5, since they threaten to play and go with the bishop e5 check, we gotta play a6. a6 is always a nice flexible move that not only prevents a bishop e5 by white, which is, by the way, one of their primary ideas, but at the same time gives you, in some moments, like b5 for yourself, followed by bishop e7, or you can just consider some queen c7, queen d6, without giving your opponent knight b5 in some moments. After a6, they have following moves. I remember playing Serbian Blitz Championship against Grandmaster Miloš Perunovic. He played queen e2. And then I asked him, what's this? He said someone, some 2700 GM, played it, and it's an interesting opening. He just wants to play b3, bishop b2, long castle. Well, whenever you chase that knight away, he just wants to jump with the knight on c4 and play a4. In that game, I had lots of troubles. I played knight bd7. Miloš went with the knight on c4, and I played something empty, such as queen c7 or something like that. Eventually, I lost that game. What was I supposed to do? Here, believe it or not, you gotta play knight b8. Repositioning your knight back to b8 so you can play knight c6 or end knight to d4. Believe it or not, this is immediately an equalizing move. Also, against queen e2, you can play knight f to d7, removing this knight, and if they play knight c4, go back with the knight on f6 because you still want to go knight c6, knight e4. What a nice way of trading 6-move queen e2. Bishop c4 is fairly, I would say, a dubious attempt by white because you play e6, and yes, we do lock our light square bishop, but they lock actually their light square bishop as well. Also, keep in mind, bishop on c4 doesn't have any kind of activity. Well, we always can chase it away with b5 afterwards. So if they play queen f3, you just play bishop d6 and you're just good because they can't support the knight with f4 or d4. You also afterwards can consider some b5, of course, in the moments when you play queen c7, short castle, and afterwards b5. But in the case they, after bishop c4, a6, play a4, and that's what everybody does because they don't want to give us b5 at any point. You play queen c7. Here the queen c7 is a specialty, and I'll show you one blitz game of mine. The game took its place on League Chess like last year. My opponent went for d4. They have to play queen e2. Believe it or not, they gotta play queen e2. And this is a fairly interesting attempt by white because I'll show you. Actually, I'll show you. But look what happened in my game. The guy went for d4. I captured. He played queen d4, and I played bishop c5. My opponent was an fm. He played queen f4. And what's happening? I played bishop d6 and I won the piece. So what a nice way, an easy way to win the game. So I was trying to carefully pick the games for you, and I actually chose two of my wins, and I told you one of my games where I lost against GM. So after queen e2, now watch out. You gotta play bishop d6. Watch out. You threaten the knight, you creating a battery, but watch out this one. Like in all these French, Caracan, and other similar type of positions, you can't play knight bd7 going after the knight. Simply, they have knight f7, and checkmate is on the horizon, or serious material consequences for black. That's why you gotta play bishop d6. They go f4. They still threaten knight bd7, knight f7, so please watch out. Don't you blunder this move. And after castles, castle, you now go with b6 and bishop e7. So all you have to remember here is play that battery queen c7, bishop d6. Don't go early knight bd7 before you short castle, and just develop your bishop on b7. After that, black is absolutely fine. We can even say that black is slightly better. Finally, if they go with bishop e2, you just go queen c7. They go f4, you go knight bd7, d4, and d6 with the full flexibility, or d4, e6. Nothing special. That bishop e2 is an ambitious way of trying. And finally, before we reach to the main move g3, they can also play a4, which for the time being, or I would say forever, it prevents b5 by black. And now you got to remember bishop e6. That's a specialty. Because it never gives them those kinds of tactical possibilities that we've just seen, coped with bishop c4, queen e2, and stuff like that. And also, when you play bishop e6, you just want to play knight bd7 because you have problems with the c6 square. You can never play knight c6 because they would take and create double pawns. So you play bishop e6, and let me show you here. They go, for example, bishop c4. Not a big deal. You play queen d6, and now you play knight c6. So queen on d6 attacked the knight on e5 with tempo and gave you knight c6. Another thing is if a5, you just go queen d6, they go knight c4, and usually we give up this bishop for their bishop, because after knight c6, we're just getting like full control of the d4 square. Well, they have problems with a pretty empty and I would say useless light square bishop on c4. After long castles, just bring the back queen on c7, go after the pawn on a5, create a battery with bishop d6, and possibly go with some h5 and knight g4 with even attack for black. And finally, a4, bishop e6, and they go g3, you go queen c7, attacking the knight. They gotta play d4, you take, and this is the move, knight c6. So you're creating with a double threat, actually forcing your opponent to take. They play rook g1 and you play rook d8. That's another reason for playing bishop e6, because afterwards when they play this d4, we play knight c6 with tempo, take by queen, threaten the rook in these g3 moments, and of course then you actually have this rook d8 harassing that queen on d4, going after the pretty weak king on e1, and of course fighting against absolutely misplaced rook on g1. And finally, after a4, bishop e6, if they play just the main move, queen f3, which says, hey man, watch out on your b7 pawn, you play knight bd7. Such a nice and easy move. And this is so simple for playing with black, because if they take, you just take by queen, defend on b7, and you have a nice development, you equalize without any problems. But if they play knight c4, now you'll see another point of having the bishop on e6. You take on c4 and play knight e5, equalizing without any problems. It's time to check the main move. And what most of these guys who play the Lubavitch line against Sicilian do here, they go g3. They go g3 in this situation, and after they go with g3, I already explained it. You gotta play queen d6. I insist, not queen c7, because on queen c7 they would play d4. Now I'll be honest with you, I played queen c7 in a couple of my games in the past, and I had problems. I had problems because I was lagging in my development. So that's why we go with the queen d6. And now let's check some possibilities. f4 is stupid because you just immediately kick the knight away with knight c6. They go knight c4, and you bring the queen back to c7. It's not only about that. Now you threaten b5. And when they play knight a3, I played one bullet game with h5. I like h5 because they can never now stop it with h3 because I play h4, and then we're breaking the pawn with h4 and f4. Also, when they play a4, which looks pretty logical because it stops and prevents b5, you go knight d4 and you say, man, I watched that lecture by Maya, and he told us when the white knights stand on c3 and c4, our knight is supposed to jump on d4. So after like knight e5, you play h5, once again the same reason, the same way, and after knight a3, e5. But nobody's going to play f4. I only had it once in my bullet game. Knight c4 is a common thing because looks like, hey man, I'm going to hit your queen with tempo. You just go queen c6. That's the point of having the queen on d6 as well. Now you have this tempo move. And when they play rook g1, f3 gives nothing because we're just having great game with e6, knight bd7, and Dubov beat Bartel like e6, knight bd7, bishop e7, short castle, queen c8, and rook f2 e8 with amazing development and absolutely nice counter played by black. But after knight c4, queen c6, I especially like rook g1 fights because here we go with this important intermediary move, bishop g4. They gotta play bishop e2 and will play like young Pragg, who's just won his Vaikanzat tournament. You play h5. You're defending the bishop on g4. You're supporting the bishop on g4 this way. And now let's take a look at this one. This game happened in Gelfand Challenge in Rapid 2021 between Nihal Sarin and Pragg. Sarin in that game went for d3. He went for knight e3, knight bd7, and you see the I would say idea behind this opening. He sacrifices a pawn on g4 to be able to take the pawn on h2. Of course, considering the fact that the rook is on g1 and the king is on e1, black is just better in those positions. After knight e5, this is my game, and I promised you one game that I played in this opening. I played queen e6. And my opponent played knight takes g4. Knight e5 and knight g4 idea that my opponent went for in the game looks very tempting, but it's actually very bad. I capture my pawn, and now I'm having a very nice pressure against the h2 pawn. My opponent played rook h1, and you know how important in the Lubavitch line is knight going to d4. The guy went for d3, rook d8, bishop e3, knight e5. Now you can't play bishop c5 because of some queen c6 ideas. By the way, if this one, you just have this and you win on the spot. So they just go with king f1, removing the king from some potential checks on f3. c4, breaking along the d file, which is a very nice thing against the queen, and then against the d3 pawn. d4, queen f5, very lovely move that I went for because I felt that the king is weak there. The guy played king g2, I played e6. And he decided to move the queen because he found lots of difficulties with this queen being under the x-rays of the rook on d8. So he played queen c1, I played knight f3. He took on c4, and I played move that actually I liked so much. Now I was threatening mate, and my opponent had to do something, probably sang king f1, but he went for h4. I captured, he took my knight, he had to play king f1, but I'm anyways winning after h2, and after he took it, I checkmated him with queen h5. This game took its place online and back to 2024. And we've just seen what to do after knight c4, queen c6, rook g1, bishop g4. And let me just show you what to do against d3. So Nihal Sarin played knight e3. If any f3, you just go back with bishop on e6, and you're always happy to give it up for the knight in some moments. Well, in the case of knight e5, you just check my game. And finally, if d3, b5, kick it away, g6, h takes g4, and you know how much we like this. I found one email game where the guy had problems, obviously, with h4 pawn, but played very nice h4. I like it because he just locked our rook, and we can't take it because they would just go with bishop f3. Yes, we do have bishop e6, but after queen e2, with the bishop pair, they can hold this type of the game with rook h1. Although after h4, black played knight bd7, bishop here, played rook to d8, brought a queen back to c8, played bishop g7, played knight b6, and played fantastic rook d6, repositioning his rook to e6. An amazing way of playing by black, and black eventually won this game. Finally, I gotta show you what happens after g3, queen d6, and they just bring the knight back to f3. Here, I'm just gonna tell you, play like Dominguez. If in the world of crazy theory, which basically improves on daily basis, you have to look for someone, and you also have to look for someone whose openings are really fresh and always top-notch. I believe Dominguez is the one to follow. Dominguez played this game against Farley, World Championship in Rapid Chess in New York like a month ago. Dominguez played b5, bishop b7, played e6, played bishop e7. This a4 is a typical way of repositioning the knight to c4, known in some Taimanov defenses. So after castles, knight bd2, knight d5, queen c7, and played knight to c6 and rook a to d8, with an idea to play h6, preventing some knight g5 ideas, knight e4, with an idea of rook f to e8, developing his last piece, and repositioning his bishop to a better diagonal, bishop f6. Dominguez eventually managed to win this game. I hope you liked this short lecture about Ljubovich line, always very annoying, hyper solid by white, but after this lecture, I believe it's not going to be a problem for you anymore. See you guys these days. Bye-bye.